A woman living in a picture-perfect suburban marriage discovers a letter that shatters her world. Hidden debts, years of gambling, a life built on lies. What begins as divorce turns into a fight for survival. Not against violence, but against silence, shame, and the weight of complicity. Paper Chains is a raw, modern drama about betrayal and resilience, where every overdue notice is a link in the chain binding her future. As she cuts through one paper at a time, she learns freedom isn't given, it's claimed. Quiet, haunting, and powerful, this story asks, how do you rebuild from ruins? Let's begin the story. The letter wasn't supposed to be hers. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, the kind of thing you almost throw away without opening. She pulled it from the pile of catalogs and grocery store flyers, meaning to set it aside for him, but the handwriting, stiff, almost mechanical, drew her thumb to the seam. Something about it whispered important, and for reasons she couldn't articulate, she tore it open before she had the chance to stop herself. The numbers inside hit like a blow. Not words, not stories, not excuses, just columns of debt. Balances owed, minimum payments overdue, the bold red warning that collection proceedings had begun. She stared at the page so long her coffee went cold. Her first thought wasn't betrayal. It was disbelief, the sort that comes when a car alarm wails in the night and you hope, absurdly, it isn't yours. She checked the name twice, 3 times. His name, his account, his disaster. The second thought, quiet, poisonous, was that maybe this wasn't new. The paper trembled in her hands as memory flooded in. Late nights when he said he was working, the sudden silences when she entered a room, the vague explanations about business expenses and temporary shortfalls. How many small, jagged pieces she had smoothed over in her mind, willing herself not to notice. She could almost hear herself from years past, telling friends at dinner that marriage was built on trust, that she and Daniel had nothing to hide from each other. She pressed her palm flat against the kitchen counter, grounding herself against the swell of nausea. Outside, the cul-de-sac hummed with its Saturday quiet. Lawns clipped short, sprinklers whispering, the faint metallic clink of a neighbor's wind chimes. The world held steady in its sameness while hers tilted. Debt. Gambling. The words weren't on the page, but she could see them as clearly as if they had been printed in bold. Her father had gambled too. She remembered her mother whispering on the phone late at night, her voice raw with shame. She remembered the eviction notice, the boxes, the way her mother's hands shook when she folded clothes that no longer had a closet to belong to. She had promised herself, with the certainty of a child, that her life would never mirror that. And yet, here it was, bleeding through her perfect suburban veneer. She tried to tally the cost, but the numbers blurred. Not just the balance on the page, but what it meant. The house she thought was theirs. The college fund, the savings account she had tended like a garden. Paper chains, she thought. Every bill, every loan, every secret, a link. She could almost hear them clinking shut around her wrists. Her body moved without her, carrying the letter upstairs to their bedroom. The bed was made, throw pillows lined like little sentries. A picture frame rested on his nightstand, their family smiling in the weak winter sun of some long-ago holiday. She stared at her own smile, frozen, manufactured, the smile of a woman certain of her life. How much of that certainty had been performance? She lowered herself to the bed, the letter still in her lap. Divorce had been a word circling their arguments lately, an unspoken possibility. She had thought it would be clean, papers signed, assets divided, freedom restored. But this was a trapdoor under her feet, dropping her into a new and terrifying place. She wasn't just divorcing a man, she was divorcing a fantasy. Her breath came shallow, quick. She tried to imagine the conversations to come, the lawyers, the explanations to family, the inevitable shame. She pictured herself sitting across from him, holding up this piece of paper, demanding an answer. But the thought exhausted her. She didn't want his explanations. She didn't trust them anymore. What she wanted was silence, a chance to hear her own voice beneath the roar of betrayal. The clock on the wall ticked in slow, stubborn beats. She closed her eyes, willing the house to hold her steady. Her marriage had been built on appearances. The tidy lawn, the Instagram vacations, the couple's dinners where they laughed too loudly. She saw now how fragile it all was, a tower of cards leaning against a storm. The debts weren't just his. They had been built in the shadows of her denial, brick by brick, while she chose not to see. Complicity. It was a word she didn't want but couldn't shake. In the distance, a mower started, drowning the quiet in its mechanical hum. She folded the letter once, twice, until it was a sharp square. It felt heavier than paper should, as though every choice she had made, every silence she had kept, had been pressed into the fibers. She placed it on the nightstand beside the smiling photograph. Husband, wife, daughter. A trinity built on lies. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. Not yet. The tears she sensed would come later, when the paperwork arrived, when the house was divided, when her daughter asked questions too big for her to answer. For now, there was only the stillness of a room that didn't feel like hers anymore, the letter sitting between past and future like a stone in her chest. And the knowledge, sharp as broken glass, that she could never go back to not knowing. The kitchen had always been her domain, not because she cooked more. Daniel had been the one with elaborate recipes and late-night experiments, but because it was where she felt her life gathered, like a river pooling into still water. The counters were spotless, the calendar filled with careful handwriting, reminders of a family life that now felt like a script from which she had been cut adrift. She returned there after leaving the letter on the nightstand, as though the act of placing it down had burned her hands. She moved mechanically, rinsing the cold coffee, running the tap until steam curled upward. She poured herself a new cup, though she didn't want it. Drinking was easier than sitting still. The refrigerator door held a gallery of order. Her daughter's drawings, clipped grocery lists, appointment cards. She stared at them as though they belonged to strangers. The drawings especially. Smiling suns, houses with hearts hovering above them, seemed almost cruel in their innocence. She traced one with her fingertip, her daughter's crooked letters spelling mommy and daddy, the family fixed in wax crayon certainty. A wave of exhaustion threatened to pull her under. She had thought she knew where her life was heading, that even in separation she would walk a straight path forward. Divorce, adjustment, healing. Instead, the ground had fractured, and she couldn't yet see where the fault lines ended. She sat at the table, coffee untouched, and let her gaze wander across the room. Everything was curated. White cabinets, brushed steel appliances, fresh flowers arranged in a vase. It was the kind of kitchen she used to envy in magazines, and now she lived inside one. But the perfection mocked her. She remembered the mortgage payments that had always felt heavy, the corners they had cut for vacations, the times Daniel had brushed off her concerns with a confident smile. "We're fine," he would say. "Don't worry so much." She had wanted to believe him. Maybe that was the greater betrayal, that she had clung to the lie because it was easier than the truth, because the truth looked like her mother's life, and she had sworn she would never repeat it. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. She wrapped her hands around the mug, searching for warmth, for steadiness. A memory surfaced, her mother's hands shaking when she signed the divorce papers, the ink smudging where tears had fallen. She remembered promising herself she would never cry over a man who had broken her trust. Yet here she was, staring at coffee she couldn't drink, feeling a hollow ache expand inside her chest. Time crawled. The morning passed in fragments. Sunlight shifting across the floor, the muted thud of a basketball from down the street, the creak of the house as if it too was holding its breath. She thought about going for a walk, about distracting herself with laundry or bills, but every action felt meaningless against the weight of what she had discovered. Her mind replayed the signs she had ignored. The late-night business calls she never overheard, the sudden withdrawals from their account, the trips to the casino he had laughed off as harmless entertainment. She had nodded, smiled, chosen not to push. She hadn't wanted to be the wife who pried, who doubted, who ruined the illusion of trust. Now the illusion was shattered anyway, and she was left holding its jagged pieces. By afternoon, the stillness had grown unbearable. She wandered upstairs, drifting from room to room like a stranger. Her daughter's room was a shrine to childhood. Stuffed animals lined in neat rows, pastel curtains catching the breeze, books stacked precariously on the shelf. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the comforter. How do you explain to a child that the walls around her might not stand much longer? That the life she knows could collapse? not because of her, but because of the lies adults weave around themselves. The thought nearly broke her. She moved on, opening the closet in the hallway. Boxes stacked neatly, labeled with seasons, with memories. She pulled one down at random, opening it to find photographs, stacks of them, birthdays, vacations, school plays. Smiling faces, arms around each other, frozen joy. She flipped through them quickly, each image a small betrayal. They had lived those moments, yes, but she could no longer trust the reality behind them. Had he been in debt already when they stood on the beach, smiling into the sunset? Had he gambled away her daughter's future before or after they posed by the Christmas tree? Her chest tightened until she shoved the photos back into the box and pushed it into the closet. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed, heart racing. Evening crept in unnoticed. The house darkened around her, shadows stretching across familiar walls. She hadn't eaten. Hunger seemed irrelevant, like a language she no longer understood. She returned to the kitchen out of habit, flicking on the light. The sudden brightness stung her eyes. The letter still sat upstairs, but its weight followed her everywhere. She knew she would need to act soon, call a lawyer, check the accounts, start untangling the financial web. But action required strength, and strength required clarity. And clarity was still out of reach. Instead, she stood at the sink, watching the reflection of her own face in the darkened window. It looked older, sharper, as though the discovery had carved lines overnight. She barely recognized herself. A part of her wanted to scream, to tear through the house, to break the fragile perfection of their curated life. But she didn't. She simply stood, hands braced on the counter, breathing slowly, willing herself not to shatter. When she finally moved, it was to turn off the light and let the darkness settle in again. Sleep didn't come that night. She lay in the darkness, sheets twisted around her, the house breathing heavily in its silence. Every creak sounded like an accusation. Every gust of wind rattling the window reminded her that something outside her control was pressing closer. She had grown used to nights of restlessness, but this was different. This was vigilance, the body bracing for impact. When the first pale light seeped across the ceiling, she felt as though she had never closed her eyes. She rose before the alarm, moving quietly through the house, careful not to wake her daughter. Morning routines had always been her anchor: coffee, packed lunch, folded laundry, but each task felt hollow, like pressing play on a recording of her old life. The mailbox beckoned. She stood at the curb, robe pulled tight, the chill of dawn raising goosebumps along her arms. The neighbors' houses lined the street, neat and identical, each pretending to be immune to chaos. She opened the metal door and pulled out the day's delivery. Another envelope. This one bore a logo she recognized, a credit company, its branding disguised in professional neutrality. She carried it inside, heart drumming, and laid it flat on the counter. For a moment she simply stared, her breath shallow, before she tore it open. The words blurred together, but the meaning was unmistakable. Past due, penalties accruing, immediate attention required. Another weight added to the chain. Another confirmation that what she had discovered wasn't a single mistake, but a pattern, a structure, a life built on lies. Her hands shook as she folded the letter and placed it beside the first. She didn't want to see them, didn't want them in her home, but discarding them felt impossible. Evidence couldn't be thrown away. The kitchen felt smaller. Air pressed down on her chest. She moved quickly, wiping counters that were already clean, scrubbing a plate that didn't need scrubbing. Motion was her only defense. Still, the letters waited, patient, unyielding. Later, while folding laundry, she found another sign. A casino rewards card tucked into the pocket of his jeans, bright plastic against the faded denim. She held it between two fingers as though it were contaminated, staring at the embossed numbers. It was confirmation of what she had feared, the shadow she had suspected but not named aloud. She dropped it into the drawer of the laundry table, slamming it shut as if the sound could erase the truth. The hours bled together. She moved through the day in fragments, clearing dishes, watering plants, answering work emails that seemed to come from a life she no longer inhabited. She could do each task, but her thoughts pulled back again and again to the stack of evidence building upstairs. Paper chains, tightening. By afternoon, exhaustion pulled her down. She stretched out on the sofa, eyes heavy, mind restless. Sleep came in fitful bursts. She dreamed of walking through a house made of paper, the walls flimsy, the roof trembling in the wind. Each step she took caused the floor to sag, but she kept walking, clutching her daughter's hand, whispering promises she knew she couldn't keep. She woke with a start, the dream fading, but the fear lingering. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, golden and indifferent. She sat up slowly, pressing her palms to her eyes, and told herself she had to start making decisions. Avoidance was another form of complicity. She had lived too long pretending not to see. In the evening after her daughter was asleep, she climbed the stairs to the bedroom. The stack of letters waited on the nightstand. She gathered them, holding the weight in her hands. They weren't just paper, they were the shape of her future. She spread them across the bed in careful lines, one after another, as though cataloging artifacts from a lost civilization. Numbers, dates, warnings, all of it evidence of a life unraveling. She read them twice, 3 times, until the words blurred and her vision swam. She wasn't just reading debts, she was reading years of silence, of choices, of denial. At some point she realized she was trembling, not with fear, but with something sharper. Anger. It had been missing until now, smothered beneath shock and exhaustion. But as she looked at the spread of lies, something inside her hardened. She could not save the marriage. She wasn't sure she even wanted to save the house. But she could save herself, and she could save her daughter from inheriting this cycle of secrecy. The thought steadied her. She gathered the papers into a folder, snapping the clasp shut. She tucked it into her bag, her movements precise, deliberate. Tomorrow, she would find a lawyer. Tomorrow, she would open the accounts in her name, gather the documents, begin the process of cutting the chains link by link. For now, she allowed herself to stand by the window, looking out over the quiet street. The moon hung low, silver and indifferent. She pressed her forehead to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. She wasn't free yet. The debt still loomed, the confrontation still waited, the legal battles and explanations stretched ahead like a long, jagged road. But for the first time since opening that envelope, she felt something other than despair. Resolve. It was small, fragile, almost unfamiliar, but it was hers. Morning arrived heavy and gray, clouds pressed low against the horizon. She woke before the alarm again, her body carrying a restless energy that sleep couldn't dissolve. The folder lay on the dresser where she had placed it the night before. A silent sentinel. She showered quickly, dressed without thought, moving through the motions of a day that would not be ordinary. The drive to work was a blur of stoplights and brake lights, the hum of tires on asphalt. She barely registered the scenery. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual, her shoulders drawn up near her ears. She caught herself in the rearview mirror at a stoplight, her face pale, her jaw set. She hardly recognized herself. At her desk, emails piled up, phone calls buzzed, coworkers moved in their easy rhythm. She answered with automatic politeness, her voice measured, her eyes trained on the screen. But beneath the surface, her mind raced. Every spreadsheet she scrolled, every document she filed, seemed to whisper the same truth. Her own life had been a spreadsheet she had never balanced, columns of lies and omissions tucked neatly out of sight. By noon, she couldn't take the pretense. She left for an early lunch, walking briskly through the downtown streets, the chill of the air biting against her skin. She turned corners without aim, her feet carrying her until she stopped in front of a glass door with gold lettering, Family Law Associates. The sight made her stomach flip. She hadn't planned to come here today, but her body had made the choice for her. She stood there a long moment, hand hovering near the handle, before stepping back. Not yet. She wasn't ready to speak it aloud, to give it weight with her voice. But soon. She turned away, quickening her pace, weaving through strangers. She told herself she was gathering strength, not running. The folder in her bag pressed against her side with each step, a reminder, a burden, a shield. The rest of the day passed in fragments. She worked enough to keep suspicion away, smiled enough to appear normal, but her thoughts spiraled back to the confrontation that loomed ahead. Tonight, or tomorrow, or the next, there was no escaping it. When she pulled into the driveway, the house seemed smaller, as though it had shrunk under the weight of its secrets. Lights glowed faintly inside. The scent of something cooking drifted out when she opened the door. Garlic, oil, a familiar comfort. For a heartbeat, She almost allowed herself to slip into the rhythm of before, the easy assumption that dinner meant family, meant safety. But then she saw his shoes by the door, polished, ordinary, belonging to a man she no longer knew. She set her bag down slowly, the folder still inside. Her chest tightened. Every instinct told her to walk into the kitchen, to place the papers on the table, to demand the truth in words that could not be smoothed over. Instead, she walked upstairs. Her daughter's room was filled with soft breathing, the steady rhythm of sleep. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the small rise and fall of the blanket. Innocence. She would fight to protect it, even if it meant tearing apart everything else. Down the hall, their bedroom waited. She entered quietly, closing the door behind her. The nightstand still held the photo, the smiles framed in wood. She turned it face down. Her heart thudded hard enough to make her lightheaded. She pulled the folder from her bag and laid it on the bedspread, the clasp catching the light. She imagined the scene, his face when he saw it, the excuses, the charm he would try to weave. She imagined her own voice, steady and unshakable, cutting through it. But she wasn't ready. Not tonight. Instead, she sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the folder, feeling the storm building inside her. The silence of the house pressed close, heavy, filled with unsaid words. Her palms ached from clenching. She pressed them against her knees, grounding herself. This was the threshold. She could feel it. The moment before glass breaks, before the first word is spoken, before everything that has been held in silence crashes into sound. She breathed slowly, counting each inhale, each exhale as though preparing for impact. Tomorrow. She promised herself. Tomorrow she would open the folder, she would place it on the table, she would not let herself look away. For now she sat in the dim room, the photo turned down, the folder waiting, the silence holding its breath with her. The night was long, restless, heavy with silence. She lay awake listening to the house, every creak magnified, every whisper of air through the vents like a reminder that something in her life had shifted permanently. When dawn finally came, gray and thin through the blinds, she rose without hesitation. The folder sat on the dresser, square and immovable. She lifted it, slid it into her bag, and carried it out the door. The motions were deliberate, almost ritualistic, locking the door, starting the car, pulling onto the road. She moved as though each step had already been rehearsed in her body, as though she had been preparing for this moment long before she tore open that first envelope. The law office appeared at the end of a quiet street, its gold-lettered sign catching the weak light. She parked across the way and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Fear hovered close, urging her to turn back, but she didn't. She crossed the street, opened the door, and walked in. Inside smelled of paper and polish, the air cool, the lighting soft. She sat in the waiting room, the folder balanced on her lap like a living thing. When her name was called, she rose. Her body carried her forward even as her heart hammered. She didn't need to explain much. The papers explained for her. Lines of numbers, warnings, overdue notices. She spread them across the desk, each one a confession, each one an indictment. Her voice was steady when she filled in the gaps, her hands firm, even as her chest felt hollow. And when she left, she carried a new weight. Not lighter, not yet, but shifted. No longer hers alone. The days that followed blurred into tasks and signatures, phone calls and forms. She moved through banks and courthouses, through lines and waiting rooms, her bag always heavier with documents. It was relentless, but each completed step felt like a cut through the paper chains, one link at a time. At home, the silence pressed in differently now. The photograph on the nightstand stayed face down. Closets thinned, drawers emptied, the house transforming from a shared space into something in transition. Her daughter noticed, asked questions, her small face open and searching. She answered with honesty softened for young ears, promising love, promising safety. Promises she intended to keep with a ferocity that startled her. Some nights fear clawed at her. The debts loomed large, the future uncertain, the process endless. But in the early mornings, when she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the first light crept across the counter, she felt sparks of something steadier than fear. Not joy, not yet, but resolve. Spring came. Trees lined the street with blossoms, petals scattering across lawns and sidewalks. She stood at the window one morning, watching the wind lift them into the air like confetti. For For the first time in months, she let herself smile. Not for show, not to reassure anyone, but because she felt the faintest edge of possibility. That night, after her daughter had gone to bed, she returned to the folder. It was thinner now, many papers already filed away or absorbed into the process. She flipped through the remaining sheets, scanning the numbers, the warnings. They no longer crushed her. They were heavy, yes, but no longer unbearable. She closed the folder and set it aside. On the table, she spread a blank sheet of paper, crisp and unmarked. She picked up a pen and began to write. Not debts, not losses, but plans. A budget, a savings goal, notes for her daughter's summer. Even small things, books she wanted to read, places she wanted to see. Each line was a refusal to be defined by the wreckage of someone else's choices, a refusal to live in silence, a refusal to let fear dictate her path. When she finished, she sat back, the page glowing pale beneath the lamp. It wasn't a roadmap to certainty, but it was a beginning. She rose, carried her cup to the sink, and lingered by the window. The street lay quiet, shadows stretching under the soft glow of the lampposts. She pressed her forehead to the glass, her breath fogging a small circle. She was not free yet. The debts remained, the legal knots still tightening and loosening, the future unclear. But she was no longer waiting to be saved. And in that quiet, in the stillness of the house, she was slowly reshaping. She felt the faint but steady truth. Freedom wasn't waiting at the end of the process. It had already begun.
Thanks for listening. Hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe.